Hi, I'm Stuart Corrigan from Vanguard, and this short webinar is for you if you're a senior leader or a director of a system that manages and pays claims. Clients that work with us in claims systems typically get the following results: 50% reduction in the time it takes to pay a claim. We've seen recently one client get a 32% increase in productivity. Of course, getting that increase in productivity means that you have the option to decrease costs or to create new services with the new capacity. And of course, what the staff say who are managing the claims, because the work design is better, is there's improved morale for them, and we know that improved morale leads to better service and better customer loyalty. So why are we doing this? Well, number one, claims is a very unique kind of system. It's what I've labelled a casework system, or it's a complex environment. We lead the field in helping clients to be able to manage complex environments or casework systems. And we know that the best way for us to provide value to you is to give you insight. So let's get started. First of all, what problems are we trying to solve? Well, if you look at the research that's recently been done in your marketplace, there are three big challenges. Number one is, how do you as a senior leader of a claims system meet your competitive pressures? How do you get a competitive advantage in the marketplace? Second is, how do you operate more economically and more efficiently? And third is, how do you take advantage of opportunities in the marketplace? So our agenda is, number one, what's the key to being competitive and growing your business? Number two, what's wrong with the design of claim systems as they are today? Number three, what would be a better basis for that design? And number four, what are the things that you need to think about when you want to implement change in your kind of system? So let's talk about the changing face of business and what is the real key to a competitive advantage. Well, if we go back to 2011, there was a piece of research done by the Customer Contact Council in New York. And what that research said was the number one goal of a business is to create a loyal customer. Because loyal customers buy more and cost less. In fact, if you look at the research that was done by Xerox in this field, what it said is loyal customers will buy between 4 and 6 times more than a customer who's just satisfied. Now, what's interesting is delighted customers don't often become loyal customers. So going the extra mile is not the key here. And what this research showed was that actually the key to growing your business, assuming that you already have a good product, is reducing customer effort. In other words, when a customer says that they want something from your business, the job is make it as easy as possible. And what the research also showed is that the number one predictor of growth in a business is not just how good the product is, but also low effort, how easy it is. And what is showed, as you can see on the chart here, is actually low effort is a higher predictor of growth than customer satisfaction. It's a higher predictor of growth than net promoter score. It's the number one predictor of growth of fast growing companies. And of course, if you look at companies like Apple, Amazon, not only are these companies that have got fantastic products, but really what they also have to offer into the marketplace is that they're unbelievably easy to deal with. In fact, you could argue that Amazon has no product at all. All it has is an amazing website that makes it unbelievably intuitive and easy for us to buy products from that company. So how do you become easy to deal with? How do you generate low effort for your customers? Well, if we think about where you want to be at some point in the future, And I don't know where you want to be, but I assume your goals are things like you want more growth, you want more customers, you want lower costs. Well, would you agree that wherever you are in the future, there's a gap between where you want to be and where you are today? Now, what governs where you are today and whether you'll get to that future point is the assumptions that you've used around the design and management of the work. In other words, the way the work is designed and managed today from the customer's point of view. That's what makes it easy for the customer to do business with you. That's what creates low effort or high effort. What do I mean by management assumptions? That's what we're going to talk about next. And we're going to start by looking at the wrong design of claim systems and the assumptions used and that underpin this design. Now, we've studied a lot of these systems over the years, as I say, a lot of what I've called casework type systems. So if we look at claim system design, generally what you see if you run a fairly large claim system is often you'll use a large workflow or a large IT system to control the work. And what we're taught is that what we should do in order to increase productivity and to maximize speed is to break the work up into small tasks. And what then happens is the claims handler is typically flooded with lots of claims or lots of tasks. Think about it like a massive to-do list. And what the claims handler has to think about is, when they come into work every day, how do I work my way through this huge to-do list? And the third design flaw is that we often use targets and service standards or service level agreements to motivate the assessors and the handlers to do the work quicker or to do the work on time. And my challenge is that because we've built these assumptions in, actually what we've seen is it's making life more difficult for customers, more difficult for claims handlers, and it's increasing costs. So if we take the first one, which is break the work up into small pieces, different people do different tasks, and the view of course is, well, this will help us to get things done faster. What we've seen first of all is that it creates a complete lack of ownership from the assessor or from the claims handler. Everybody's focusing on just doing one little bit of the claim rather than owning the claim end to end. The second thing we see is multiple contacts to and from the customer, and what often we see is this thing that we've labelled failure demand, which is because the organisation fails to do the right thing for the customer, they'll call and call again, chasing to say, where's my claim, or what's happening with the claim. And we've seen typically that 50 to 80% of all demand coming into claims systems is failure demand, which of course is reducing capacity and increasing costs. Everybody's busy working on lots of little tasks, but the customer isn't getting what they want. And again, let's remember, what's the goal of a claim system? To make a decision on a claim and or to pay that claim. So unless we're making decisions on claims or paying claims, it doesn't matter how busy we are, nothing's getting done. The second is to flood the claims handler with lots of work. So even if the claims handler or the assessor are managing claims end to end, the typical industry standard is to have around 80 to 90 claims. In other words, when a new claim comes in, the first thing that we'll do as leaders is allocate that claim to an assessor or a handler. The view being is that if it's allocated, we can get started working on it early and hence we'll get faster throughput. Well, unfortunately, the reverse happens. Because what happens in this system is the more claims that we allocate above an optimum number, and that optimum number is different depending on different systems, different people, is when there's too many claims allocated, what we have is this phenomenon called multitasking, where again, if we think about this huge to-do list, what we're actually doing is we're doing little bits of work on lots of claims. Again, everybody's busy, but what we're not being able to do is close the claim, make a decision. And what happens then, of course, is we also have to have multiple priorities because backlogs build, and then we have multiple queues and multiple systems, and it makes it even more difficult for the claims handler to decide when they come in the morning, which claim am I going to focus on today? So what then happens is we get systems where you see that what claims handlers sometimes focus on is the easy claims. Then as backlogs build, we have to focus on the more difficult claims. And constantly, because we have to build in more and more priorities, because it then becomes which customer is shouting loudest is the one that's going to get handled that particular day, as we're building more and more multitasking into the system. The third big assumption we must challenge is that we should use targets and service level agreements. In other words, we give people a target date to settle a claim. Well, there's a number of problems with this. Number one is it assumes that the targets are based on science. Think about the service level agreements you may have in your own business. What science was used to create that number? Was there any science, or was it just essentially a finger in the air that decided that's the number that we're going to use? It also assumes rational behaviour from the handlers. In other words, it assumes that we always know which claim to pick up, and we assume that if something is getting nearer to the date, then we'll focus on that claim. Often, however, it creates this problem called student syndrome. If you go back to your school or university days and you imagine that you were asked to write your first essay, how many of us went home that night and immediately started working on the essay? And how many of us said, well, I've got 2 weeks to do this essay, and before you know it, it's 2 weeks down the road, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're trying to figure out, how do I get this essay finished on time for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? So because we set a target, often it drives this dysfunctional behaviour of student syndrome. The other problem it can drive is cherry picking, which is again, when there's backlogs in the system, then often what we do is we say, let's go for the easy claims, or let's leave the hard claims so that we can get more through in order to satisfy the service level agreement. So using targets and service level agreements, to the contrary, doesn't make things better, it actually makes things worse. So what would be a better design for claim systems? First, case ownership end to end. And when a claim comes in and it goes to the handler, once they have their optimum number, then what we must do is we must choke the release of work so that actually they're focused on a smaller number of claims, and those claims are staying live at all times. Those that are not live essentially are staying in a queue. They're still staying visible, but you as the leader can then make decisions on what do I need to do to increase capacity in order to get more throughput. What we mustn't do, as I said before in the bad design, is just allocate all claims. So number one, case ownership. Number two, limit the release of work to create a focus and limit multitasking, and remove service level agreements and incentives and move to end-to-end measures related to purpose. So if you look at this particular chart, what this particular chart shows is an end-to-end measure. This company were previously using service level agreements and everything looked like it was okay. Of course, from the customer's point of view, what you can see is actually that it's taking anything around 100 to 180 days to actually settle a claim. Nobody knew, because what they were focused on was, are we hitting our service level agreements, which only covers little bits of the process, not the end-to-end flow. So if we look at visual management, this is where we have to have case ownership so that we can see all cases visual at all times. We have to limit the release of work to the case handler so that they're working on the optimum number so that they don't multitask. We have to remove the service level agreements and the incentives and move to measures related to purpose. In other words, how long does it take us to settle a claim? And then implement a visual management system that looks like this, where number one, you can see in the middle what are the actual outputs, how well are we doing, so that you as a leader can walk up to your visual measurement board or your visual management board and see at any given time how well is the system performing. On the left hand side of the board you can see the inputs. Are we adhering to the new rules that we've implemented? For example, limiting the number of cases that we're releasing into the flow, working on a single priority rule as opposed to multiple priorities, working on cases in the right order. And what we also then see on the far end of our visual management system is when problems occur, we also have a system for collecting those problems, aggregating them, and then solving and taking action on the big problems so that they don't reoccur again. Now, in terms of implementation, how do you go about applying these new rules? Well, the first thing is you have to understand whether the rules that I've talked about actually are in your system. So therefore, what you have to do is study first and understand the underlying rules of the current system and make those rules visible. Does multitasking exist? Are you using service level agreements? Are you flooding the case handlers with work? Second is we work with leaders to help them understand why are those rules the wrong rules and what are the consequences of those rules. And we work with the leaders to say, well, what would the new rules be? Then, of course, in order to get frontline staff to change, what we also have to do is have them go and dig up the system so that they understand the flaws in the design and the management of the current work. You have to implement new measures, because if you just make a change to an organisational system and you use the old measures, then essentially what happens is people will revert back to what they're measured on rather than doing the right thing. And ultimately it may mean that you even have to look at job role design to make sure that the job role design suits the new organisational flow. So the key to change is study first, change second. And that's where we come in. It may be from this short webinar that I've given you enough ideas that you want to go out and have a look at your own system, study first, understand the rules that are driving the current performance, and then go off and try and make some change. And of course that's absolutely fine. It may be that there are some of you who've said, well, we might need some support to help us study the system. Underneath this webinar you'll see a button which says Diagnostic Help and Support. Click that button and you'll be able to download a short PDF which tells you how we'd go about helping you do a short period of study with leaders to understand some of the problems in your system, the rules that are driving those problems, and help you design a better way of running your claims system. If you're interested in that, click the button, download the PDF and get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for sticking with me over this short seminar, and I hope it's created some value for you. Thank you.